In class, we've been discussing various art movements after the war in Germany, and in this screencast, we'll be looking at the Bauhaus, which is another post-war German movement that overlaps with Expressionism and some of the other movements, and is focused on rebuilding Germany. It was a government-sponsored program initiated in 1919 with the idea that industry, when applied to the arts, can help all of society. The original leader of the Bauhaus and the driving force behind it in most of its history is Walter Gropius, who is an architect by trade, and he was invited by the German government in 1919, the year after the end of World War I, to take two existing academies and meld them into a single new institution that would embrace industry as a means of making less expensive but more artistic designs for architecture and for interior design. The school is first founded in the city of Weimar, which is the capital of post-war Germany. It's referred to as the Weimar Republic. We've seen this in other places in class. Then in 1925, they moved to the city of Dessau, which is where the famous Bauhaus building was built. So this is really the second school building for the Bauhaus and the more famous of the two. Gropius said that the aim of the Bauhaus was, and these are his words, the aim of the Bauhaus is to achieve a development of modern housing from the simplest household appliance to the complete dwelling. This is, in fact, exactly what gave rise to the name Bauhaus. It's German for build, Bau, and of course, house, house. So he built house from not only the exterior shell of the building itself, but also everything in it. The school was founded on a core that focused on what they called functionalism. In other words, the forms of the design should be entirely based on the function of the object. It is the Bauhaus that is primarily behind the old adage that you've probably heard, that form follows function. This is functionalism, and that the use should define the design. This then, of course, defines the design of the building itself. All of the parts of the building, as you can see, look very, very different from each other because each of them has a very different function. On the left, we're looking at the entry to the school. So the main entry is just here. And because this is the entry to the school, the public face of the school, it has the name of the school on it as well. Directly behind the entry is the major part of the structure, the workshop, what Gropius called the laboratories. And you'll notice that this part of the building is an entire curtain wall of glass, letting a significant amount of light in, which is important, of course, for art studios. Again, form follows function. We want strong light, strong natural light to create works of art in. At the same time, this transparency that we see in the workshop block is also a metaphor. Gropius has a very, very strong social agenda with the Bauhaus. He wants to make designs for the public. He wants to show the public that they have nothing to hide. This isn't happening behind an ivory tower or, the standard marble walls of the university, but rather this is connected to the world around us. You can see in, they can see out. Strong connection with the outside world, and absolutely nothing to hide. Sort of demystifying the process. If we continue this idea of architectural metaphor, as we look at other parts of the building, so we've been looking at the workhouse block here, this is connected to the administrative center here by a walkway. And you'll notice that that walkway actually, the street goes underneath it. So the Bauhaus bridges two sides of the street. You can see it on a few slides back as well, where there's a street that runs directly through here into it. So again, it's this idea that the building communicates with the world around it, that people are welcomed in. There are no walls separating it from the world around. Other parts of the building are also designed with other functions in mind. In the back, you can see the student dormitory area. This is divided into the areas that are there for group activities on this side, and then the group for the private activities on the opposite side, where each student has, again, a significant amount of light let into their room, and each student gets their own little balcony as well, but are part of a group collective that is the Bauhaus itself. It is a community. Even though sort of collectiveness seems to be emphasized here, where every room is exactly the same, a great amount of individuality was inspired in this, working together as a community to exploit all of the creativity the students had, but then each of them allowed to move beyond that. Here's a theater group that worked at the Bauhaus. They had, the student life was really very strong there. They had theater performances, musical performances, and whatnot. Here they are dressed as machines. Again, the idea of industry being embraced everywhere as they perform a sort of theater piece on the balcony of the student block. This idea of functionalism is applied to all of their designs. Bauhaus designs are characterized by geometric simplicity, which was focused on by all of the designers for mass production. Geometric designs are easier for industry to reproduce. At the same time, they are very much interested in the aesthetic appeal of these geometric designs and how the different elements work together. So here, a teapot based on squares and circles and spheres, and showing us very clearly that Bauhaus aesthetic. In order to make designs for industry, designs that can be carried out for mass production, but at the same time aesthetically pleasing and beautiful, Gropius came up with a new curriculum, very, very innovative at the time and radical in 1919, that you would basically work your way from the outside of this target to the inside. And you notice that the bullseye is building. That's where we're all aiming, designing, building. But in order to get there, we move from basic courses, which, as you can see, are sort of quite like your foundations courses, elementary study of form. And then we move from that to studying various kinds of materials, nature itself, more focused studies of those materials that eventually lead us to building, which is the central aim. Now, this might seem fairly normal to us today, and that's only evidence of the impact of the Bauhaus. But in fact, this was radical in 1919 to move from basic courses that were theoretically based to more practically based work with materials. In fact, that's exactly the opposite of the way people taught. They usually taught apprenticeship in materials, and then the theory sort of flows out of that. Needless to say, for some of the old guard in the existing institutions that Gropius melded together, many of them were reluctant to engage in this new curriculum, and a great number of them quit in 1919, which turned out for Gropius to be a great benefit, because he could hire their replacements, people who thought like him, who had the same ideas about avant-garde ways of teaching design and the relationship of materials to the finished product. And when he hires new faculty, there are a bunch of people that we've seen before. Here's the Bauhaus faculty in 1925, and lo and behold, there's Kandinsky. We'll see him in class, Paul Klee, Moholy-Nagy we'll talk about in class, Oscar Schlemmer we'll be seeing as well. On and on, a group, there's Lionel Feininger, the American who we saw when we talked about the futurists. All of these people wound up at the Bauhaus, all hired directly by Gropius himself. Our friend Feininger was, in fact, the very first faculty appointment that Gropius made. And his job in 1919, when he was hired as the first replacement position, was to be the head of the printmaking shop. So the Bauhaus. Here's the cover to the Bauhaus Manifesto, which Feininger nicknamed the Cathedral to Socialism. Socialism has had a bad rap for many years, but the bottom line of socialism is that one should work for the good of the community, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. In this case, he gives it a sort of lofty, theological basis by calling it a cathedral to socialism. And you remember him from the bicycle race that we saw before, working in a futurist style. But as he becomes closer and closer to the Bauhaus and its ideas, we see him reworking various expressionist themes that he'd been playing with before. This is an architectural theme, church towers in the town of Zerkau. Remember that Feininger is an American who had expatriated to Germany back in 1916 and spent the rest of his life there. Here he takes these sort of cubist ideas about landscape painting and applies them now to the woodcut cover for the Bauhaus Manifesto. By calling it a cathedral to socialism, it gives the entire project something of a utopian tone, a hope for the future, which is at the core of the Bauhaus. They're building for a better Germany, rebuilding Germany after the war. As we saw, some of the other artists hired by Gropius included Vasily Kandinsky, who came to the Bauhaus in 1922. As he arrives at this architectural school, his style changes from more amoeba-like forms to something that's much more architectonic. Straight lines, circles begin to dominate geometric shapes in his work, and we'll look at more of these in class. He also hires constructivist artist Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, comes from Hungary, also at the same time, 1922, to teach at the Bauhaus, and brings various constructivist ideas, ideas that we talked about in other classes as well. Again, avant-garde artists from all over Europe are coming to the Bauhaus to teach, and to teach in what is ostensibly an architectural school, even though all of these different movements were primarily painting sculptural movements. Again, all of them are trying to create a new world, a world that is better than the world we had left behind. With all of this painting and all of this theory, it should come as no surprise that there were no real Bauhaus houses built. They influenced architecture, but there weren't any architects coming out of the Bauhaus that while they were at the Bauhaus actually built anything. That said, Bauhaus design had a huge impact on 20th century art. Marianne Brandt's industrial designs for interiors are probably seem very familiar to you now. Desk lamps like this are kind of a dime a dozen, but not as well designed as hers in such fine materials, and certainly when Brandt designs these, in the 20s, these are avant-garde designs breaking away from sort of Victorian frill and unnecessary decoration. The form should follow the function. Some of the designs that came out are incredibly famous works. Marcel Breuer began experimenting with tubular steel when he had bought a bicycle. It inspired him to think about what he could do with tubes of steel. So he hired a plumber to weld different tubes together for this armchair that he named after Kandinsky. Perhaps one of his most famous designs is the tubular steel chair, with the chair caning for the back and the seat. And you've seen these everywhere. The whole point of it, the reason you've seen them everywhere is remember that the Bauhaus is designing for mass production, designing with industry in mind, and wanting to make designs that are both aesthetically interesting and at the same time capable of being produced quickly and on the cheap. So for Breuer's B32 tubular chair, you'll notice it does something that no chair had ever done. It doesn't have four legs. It has only two. There are no rear legs to it. This is, again, exploiting the capacity of tubular steel. Well, the Bauhaus is running strong, more or less, from 1919 all the way to the early 1930s. Then in 1931, there were various local political victories by the Nazi Party, and this gave rise to right-wing nationalists who seemed to be very suspicious of abstract art in particular in all of its different forms. And when it came to the Bauhaus, even though they had a social agenda, all of this Bauhaus fun that was going on, people dressing up as machines. Here, one of the Bauhaus female students with a machine-like head sitting in a Vasily chair. This must have seemed very, very odd to the right-wing governments that had been elected to office in the early 30s. These performances in costume that seemed very much like Dada art in their way, and certainly are connected to that, would have seemed like total anarchy to any of the outsiders looking in. You know, where's the buildings? Where are the designs? When in fact these are the Bauhaus is as much as anything focusing on theory and creativity. And it should come as no surprise then that Hitler shut down the Bauhaus in 1932. Here's a nice collage commemorating the end of the Bauhaus in 1932. And what was Hitler's loss, Germany's loss, became really the world's gain. Kandinsky, who had been at the Bauhaus during that period, ends up moving to Paris. Laszlo Moholy-Nagy ends up in Chicago. Walter Gropius, Marcel Breuer, both end up at Harvard. Much of American art and art education comes out of the Bauhaus and its dismantling by Hitler. With this idea of artists that expatriated to other countries because of Hitler's shutting down the Bauhaus, we need to sort of briefly look at the figure of Joseph Olpers. He began as one of the materials teachers of the Bauhaus. He taught glass. This is in fact fused pieces of glass over at the Hirschhorn. Again, much of this is not on display, but you can tell it has an architectonic form, and it's also architecturally titled as well. As the Bauhaus is shut down in the early 30s, Olpers moves to Black Mountain College in South Carolina and then eventually to Yale, and develops color theory classes, which he works out through a series of pieces called Homage to the Square. And these are the exact color theories that to this day we still teach in 2D design and color theory classes. Olpers' Homage to the Square is meant to make you see the different relationships to colors and how they impact our perception of those colors, how perception of colors differs based on the colors next to them. And these look familiar to sort of projects that you might have done in some of your studio classes because the Bauhaus was simply